The letter lay crumpled and soaked in blood, its torn edges fluttering in the stale draft of the desolate room. The walls, stained with old grime and peeling paint, closed in like silent witnesses to something unspeakable. A single beam of flickering light swung from the ceiling, barely illuminating the darkened corners. A rotary phone rang out sharply, echoing through the silence like a scream held too long. The sirens in the distance wailed like mourning ghosts. And on the floor, just inches from the letter, was an overturned chair and a coffee mug shattered into porcelain shards. Sarah stood frozen at the threshold, unable to step forward, her breath shallow, chest rising like she was drowning in air. She whispered without sound. Her eyes widened. Her fingers trembled. She didn't remember coming here. But something inside her knew that whatever happened here had changed everything. And that she had been the last one to see him alive. Sarah said, I wasn't supposed to be there. I don't even remember unlocking the door. But the smell, it hit me first. Not death, not blood, just loneliness. A type of decay that seeps from the walls when a soul has left the room too long. I stared at that letter, my chest tightening. It had my name on it, scribbled, in the same handwriting that once sent me poems on napkins. Jake's handwriting. My legs felt heavy. My thoughts felt scrambled. Had I been here before? Did I do something? Did I see something? The guilt rolled in like a storm cloud, and I couldn't look away from the blood. I kept hearing the sirens, far off but coming. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just kept staring at the name. Sarah. A name I didn't want to recognize anymore. The last time I saw Jake, he was sitting on the edge of the subway vent, steam rising around him like a stage curtain. He looked at me, but I didn't stop. I didn't say anything. I just walked past. My boots echoed on the concrete. And now he was gone. Just disappeared. They said he was another name in a file. Another homeless statistic. But that letter proved otherwise. It proved he remembered me. Maybe even blamed me. God. What if I had said something that night? What if I had stopped? What if I had just acknowledged him? Now it was too late. But why did the letter have my name? And why was it written in blood? They said I must have blacked out. Stress. Trauma. Maybe alcohol. But I knew that wasn't it. Something was missing. Something vital. Something stolen from inside my head. I started to retrace my steps. The bar. The alley. The man with the red coat. Jake didn't wear red. He wore layers of faded denim and scarves too long for his neck. But that night, I remember red. Flashing red. And a whisper. Someone said it's time. Time for what? I can't tell anyone this. They'll think I'm crazy. But I'm not. I was there. And someone doesn't want me to remember. The blood wasn't fresh. That's what the detective told me. It had been there for days. But I saw Jake 2 days ago. Alive. Breathing. Whispering lines of poetry into a paper cup. So who was lying? The cops? Me? Time itself? I touched the edge of the letter and something surged through me, a wordless scream trapped under my skin. I dropped it like it burned. The sirens were closer now. I didn't want to be there when they arrived. But I didn't want to leave Jake behind either. Not again. Sarah said I used to pass him every day. Same spot. Anyway. Same coat. Same crooked smile. He'd nod. I'd pretend not to see. I told myself it wasn't personal. I had deadlines, noise in my head, places to be. But it was personal. Ignoring someone is always personal. I remember once, he said something as I walked by. I couldn't even tell you what. I just kept walking. I used to think I was doing the kind thing, letting him keep his dignity by not giving pity. Now I see how cowardly that was. There was a moment when he looked up with these eyes, Not begging, not broken, just waiting. I could have said anything. Just one word. But I didn't. That silence haunts me more than any scream ever could. Jake wasn't just a homeless man. He was a presence. A quiet part of the landscape that people chose not to see. But his words, they stuck. He'd write lines on scraps of cardboard. I saw one once. It said, "Truth is a wound we all ignore until it bleeds through our shoes." I remember laughing to myself, thinking how dramatic. But now I wonder if he was trying to warn me. Warn all of us. He wasn't invisible. He was screaming in plain sight. And now that he's gone, his silence is louder than the traffic, louder than my thoughts. I went back to his spot. Someone else was sitting there. They didn't know him. Didn't care. The city moved on. But I can't. I found a notebook. It was tucked behind a loose brick where he used to sit. The cover was torn leather, pages yellowed, ink faded. I flipped through, and my breath caught. These weren't ramblings. They were verses. Tight structure. Painful elegance. One line said silence is the echo of betrayal. Another asked how long does a man scream before he disappears. I sat right there on the street and read every page. My hands were shaking. I knew this voice. It was the same voice that wrote poems on napkins for my college paper. Jake was Julian Ashcroft. The Julian Ashcroft. The literary ghost. The missing genius. My God. What happened to him? Julian Ashcroft vanished 10 years ago. Just stopped publishing. No one knew why. There were whispers, accusations, lawsuits, addiction. But nothing concrete. His last known piece was a takedown of a major publishing house. Then, nothing. Now here he was on the sidewalk, erased by a city that prizes fame and discards the fallen. And I ignored him. I idolized his work, wrote essays about his syntax, quoted him in lectures. And when I passed him in real life, I treated him like trash. The kind of irony that makes your stomach turn. How could someone so gifted be reduced to this? And how many more are out there, brilliance buried under cardboard? I brought his notebook home. I couldn't help it. It felt sacred, like a relic. I read it every night. And the more I read, the more I saw his descent, between the lines, the metaphors. His verses got darker, sharper, like barbed wire. Some weren't even poems. They were warnings. Names. Places. I think he knew he was being erased. Or hunted. I don't know which scares me more. But one thing is clear, he didn't forget me. There's a page. Just one word written on it. Sarah. Dadaland. Jane. How. Day. The ink was smeared, like maybe he was crying when he wrote it. Or bleeding. I don't know what I've stepped into. But I can't walk away now. I went to my editor the next morning, notebook in hand. I told her what I found, who he really was. She looked at me like I had 3 heads. She said everyone's got a theory. Everyone wants to turn a tragedy into a headline. But this wasn't theory. It was truth, bleeding ink across yellowed paper. I offered her the pages. She didn't even look. Just said homeless narratives don't sell. Too sad. Too messy. She leaned in close and said, "You want your job. Drop it." I left her office with my fists clenched. My cheeks burned with shame. The same kind of shame I felt every time I ignored him on the street. They'd rather bury a man like Jake than admit the system broke him. I realized then, I couldn't trust them. I had to tell his story myself. Even if it meant losing everything. I started digging. Old archives. University records. Forgotten interviews. And his name, Julian Ashcroft, began appearing like a ghost in footnotes and lawsuits. He had once accused a major publishing house of plagiarizing his work. They crushed him. Blacklisted him. Silenced him. And now I held the proof, handwritten verses that matched their best-selling titles word for word. They stole from him, then erased him, and we all let them. It wasn't just about poetry anymore. It was about justice. I sat there with a wall of names and dates behind me, notebook open, sticky notes blooming like petals around his story. And I realized if I expose this, they won't just discredit me. They'll come for me, just like they did him. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Emails surfaced, anonymous leaks, whistleblowers confirming Ashcroft's manuscripts were used under ghost names. Editors, agents, literary stars, every one of them complicit. They'd turned his voice into gold while he froze on the sidewalk. I contacted one of them, a retired agent. She agreed to meet. We sat at a diner, plastic menus between us, her eyes darting like she expected to be followed. She whispered he had something they wanted. Something hidden. A final manuscript. The one that names names. But she wouldn't say more. She just slid a matchbox across the table with a single word scribbled inside. Underpass. She left before her coffee arrived. And suddenly, I wasn't just chasing a story. I was being pulled into something buried and dangerous. I found the underpass. Cold. Wet. Reeking of mold and rust. A makeshift camp, long abandoned, graffiti peeled like scabs from the concrete walls. I searched with a flashlight, stepping over broken bottles and crumpled jackets. Then, hidden beneath a torn top, I found it. A rusted lockbox. Inside, pages. Hundreds of them. Unfinished poems. Rants. Ditties. Riddles. Names. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. No address. Just my name. Sarah. Oh. My fingers hesitated. My heart felt like it might break through my ribs. Why me? Why now? I opened it with a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Inside was the beginning of a poem. The last thing he ever wrote. I read the first line, and my blood ran cold. The poem read, "You watched me die every day," and called it mercy. My breath caught. I dropped the page. My ears rang. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just a poem. It was a message. He wrote it for me. Every memory of walking past him without a word slammed into my chest like bricks. And I realized he knew. Knew I recognized him. Knew I chose silence. He didn't blame the publishers or the editors. He blamed me. And maybe he was right. I didn't just ignore a man. I ignored a warning. I ignored pain. I ignored the truth. And now that truth was demanding to be heard. I picked up the page, my tears soaking into the ink. I said out loud, "I'm sorry." And the echo that answered sounded almost like forgiveness. I took the manuscript pages home, spread them across my living room floor like puzzle pieces. Each stanza dripped with rage, love, betrayal. There were names, editors, critics, even a judge. But what stunned me most was the tone. These weren't cries for help. They were warnings. Prophecies. He wrote about being followed. About men in suits offering deals. About vanishing voices. Then I found it, an early draft of an article he wrote a decade ago. The headline read, "They publish my words while starving my voice." It was never released. No outlet would touch it. I searched the byline. It wasn't Julian Ashcroft. It was a name I'd never heard before. Daniel Isaac. My hands shook. That was his real name. Julian Ashcroft was a pen name. The man I ignored every day wasn't just a poet. He was the truth they tried to erase. I dug deeper. Public records. Archives. I found a birth certificate. Daniel Isaac. Born in 1973. New Orleans. NFAU. Awards. Scholarships. And then, gone. Nothing after 2010. Like he fell off the grid. But I found a court case. Daniel versus Barrow Press Story. It was sealed. Settled quietly. But buried in the footnotes was a payout. A large one. Followed by NDA agreements. They bought his silence. And when he tried to fight back, he disappeared. He had been speaking truth too loud, too raw, and they erased him. Not with a gun. With ink. With contracts. With silence. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. My whole life I believed in stories. Now I realize some stories get buried alive. And I was standing on the grave. I printed everything. Binders, flash drives, backups. If anything happened to me, the story wouldn't die. I knew now they'd erased Julian once. They wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Only this time I wouldn't let them. I started writing my own article. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about complicity. About how we let genius rot when it doesn't wear the right suit. I remembered his words from the notebook. Silence is the echo of betrayal. My silence had already cost too much. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I wrote all night. Every word felt like a strike against everything that buried him. I didn't care about career, about safety, about permission. I cared about truth. And I wasn't writing it in pencil. The next morning, I hit publish. I didn't wait. I didn't ask. The story went live on my personal blog. Within hours, it spread. People began sharing it, commenting, debating. Some called it fiction. Others demanded investigations. But the fire had started. Then I got a message. No sender ID. Just 3 words. You shouldn't have. My chest locked. No. I closed the curtains. I checked my locks. Then another ping. You missed a name. Attached was a scanned page. One I hadn't seen before. A final note from Jake. Or Daniel. A confession. Or a trap. At the bottom, a signature I recognized. My editor. My heart stopped. She'd known all along. She wasn't protecting the paper. She was protecting herself. I confronted her. Walked right into her office, phone in hand, the printed page in the other. She looked up and didn't flinch. She said, "You're in over your head." Her voice was calm, cold. She told me Daniel was brilliant, but unstable. That he was dangerous. That publishing his work would have brought lawsuits, collapse, scandal. That burying him was a mercy. I asked if she ever spoke to him. She didn't answer, just stared. Then she said something I'll never forget. We decide whose voice is worth hearing. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about justice. It never was. It was about control. And she'd kill 1,000 Daniels to keep it. I walked out. Not because I was scared, but because I finally saw the monster's face. The article had gone viral. But it wasn't praise I received. It was silence, then backlash. Emails bounced. My office badge stopped working. The newsroom locked me out. And suddenly people I trusted vanished. Friends stopped answering calls. I became radioactive. The message was clear. Tell the truth and you'll be erased too. But I didn't stop. I posted more from the manuscript. I made audio readings. I quoted Daniel's lines on social media, tagging names. People began to listen. Some even remembered him. But the higher the article climbed, the lower I sank. I wasn't sleeping. I barely ate. Paranoia set in. Every knock felt like a threat. Every silence felt loaded. But I kept going. Because now it wasn't about me. It was about making sure he was never ignored again. Then, someone contacted me. A former publisher. Voice disguised, no name given. They told me Daniel's last known location wasn't the underpass. He'd been moved. Hidden. Doll. Somewhere, off-grid. Not for his safety, for theirs. They feared what he knew, what he might release. But they couldn't kill him, not without scrutiny. So they made him disappear. They said the envelope was a breadcrumb. That Daniel left it for me, because I was the only one who looked up. The only one who ever saw him. And that scared them. The voice told me if I wanted answers, I had to go to the East Terminal. Midnight. Alone. I asked why me. The answer came like a punch. Because you still have something to lose. East Terminal was abandoned. Midnight air hung thick with diesel fumes and rust. I waited, every second stretching like wire. Then I saw him. Limping. Older. Beard long. Eyes hollow, but burning. It was him. It was Daniel. I ran toward him. He didn't smile. Just said you shouldn't have come. I told him the world needed his story. He shook his head. They already have it. I didn't understand. He handed me a cassette tape. Old. Faintly labeled final draft. He said they'd never let it see the light. But maybe I could. Then he looked past me. And I knew we weren't alone. A black car rolled into view. One Prudy, Deorbsch. He whispered, run. I did. But not before I saw two men step out, walking toward him like shadows made of silence. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs gave out. Hid the tape in my coat. Got home just before sunrise. I played it. His voice crackled through static, raw, shaking, poetic. He recited names, crimes, contracts. Now, every betrayal. It was a death sentence disguised as poetry. And it was beautiful, horrifying, sacred. I uploaded it. Sent it to journalists, activists, forums. The audio spread like wildfire. I knew there'd be consequences. I didn't care. I remember his last line. They can bury my body, but not my voice. I cried. Not because he was gone, but because for the first time, I truly heard him. And it broke something inside me that would never heal. By morning my name was everywhere. So was his. Hashtags. News cycles. Comment sections overflowing. Some called it fake. Others called it revolution. But the story had broken through. And for once they couldn't silence it. Not fully. But they did come for me. My apartment was searched. My accounts frozen. My reputation smeared. I lost everything. But I gained something I never thought I'd find, clarity. I stopped waiting for permission to speak. I started using my voice the way he did. Sharp, dotty. Unforgiving. True. They tried to unwrite Daniel's story. But stories don't die when someone listens. They live. They echo. And sometimes they roar. I made sure his voice would never go quiet again. Even if mine did. They issued a statement. Cold. Sterile. Denying everything. Said the recordings were manipulated. Called Daniel mentally unstable. Called me unstable. They threw their money at lawyers and press conferences, hoping to drown the truth in a flood of polished denial. But something had changed. The public didn't flinch. They dug. Cross-referenced. Former interns spoke out. Editors quit. The cracks in the facade split open. I stood at the edge, watching the empire they built on stolen words tremble. And still, no one had seen Daniel since that night. The last image of him was a grainy still. Him standing alone at the terminal, one hand raised. Like he knew this would be the end. Like he was already saying goodbye. I was called in for questioning. Not once. Repeatedly. They tried to twist my words. Said I forged the tape. Said Daniel never existed. But I brought proof. Receipts. Wonderlines. Handwritten drafts. Witnesses. Every time they closed a door, I opened another. I wasn't fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for his memory. and for all the others like him, those who vanished without a headline. One officer whispered after the interrogation, "You're lucky to be alive." I wanted to say, "No, I'm lucky to be heard." When I walked out of that precinct, I wasn't afraid anymore. They couldn't erase me. Not now. Not after all this. They tried to spin the story one last time. Talk shows. Paid experts. Articles calling it a myth. But people didn't buy it. Artists started posting Daniel's poetry. Students quoted him in essays. A publisher reached out. Said they wanted to release his full manuscript. I declined. I self-published it instead. Released every page, unfiltered, uncut, online for free. I watched the download counter tick past 1 million in 48 hours. It wasn't about profit. It was about justice. His words belonged to the people, not the machine that broke him. In one post, someone wrote, "This saved my life." That's when I knew Daniel hadn't just fought to be remembered. He fought to be found. And now, finally, he was. I got a letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a photograph, black and white. Daniel standing on a beach years ago, smiling. Not haunted. Not hiding. Free. On the back, one sentence. They couldn't keep me quiet. I don't know who sent it. Maybe he's alive. Maybe it's a message planted long ago. Maybe it doesn't matter. Because he's louder now than he ever was in life. His poems are etched in murals, whispered in protests, printed in books without barcodes. I carry one with me everywhere. It reminds me of what happens when we stop listening. And what we become when we finally hear. The world didn't change overnight. But it shifted. Slightly. Enough. New writers emerged, unafraid to speak. Stories surfaced. Publishers fell. People asked questions they used to avoid. And I finally wrote something for myself. My story. Not to be published. Not to be read. Just to be written. To remember what it cost. I visit the place he used to sit. It's quiet now. But not silent. Someone carved his name into the bench. Underneath it reads "Still Speaking." And every time I pass I nod. The way he used to nod at me. Not out of guilt. But respect. I see him now. Fully. And I'll never stop. I was invited to speak at a vigil held in Daniel's name. They called it a celebration of forgotten voices. Hundreds came. Some brought candles. Others brought notebooks, reading his words aloud in trembling voices. I didn't read anything. I just stood there, listening. Letting their voices carry what his once had. The night was warm. The air thick with reverence. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in guilt. I felt anchored. Changed. I had spent so long wishing I could go back. To see him, hear him, stop for just 1 second. But maybe that moment had come now. And I had finally stopped long enough to let his voice echo through mine. They asked me afterward if I would keep writing. I said I didn't know. Because what I wrote now felt heavier. It wasn't just about stories. It was about responsibility. I learned that words could destroy or deliver. That truth doesn't need a megaphone, just a crack to shine through. I still hear his voice sometimes. In subway stations. Between the lines of old books. In the silence between raindrops. He's part of me now. Not as a ghost, but as a compass. And every time I pick up a pen, I ask myself one thing. Is this worth the cost of silence? If the answer is yes, I write. Publishing house that erased Daniel eventually crumbled. Lawsuits, leaks, public reckoning. But it wasn't justice I celebrated. It was memory. The kind that sticks long after the headlines fade. I watched young poets recite Daniel's lines at open mics. Heard them chant his name at protests. His story had become a shield. A weapon. A prayer. And through it all, I never claimed credit. I didn't need to. It wasn't my story. It never was. I was just the mirror that refused to stay clean. The voice that refused to stay quiet. And if that was the only thing I ever got right, it was enough. I kept the notebook. The original one. Its cover worn, pages soft at the edges. I never edited it. Never changed a word. I just read it again and again. Each time it hit different. Sometimes it felt like a love letter. Sometimes a eulogy. But always, it felt alive. Like his soul was trapped in ink, refusing to fade. I take it with me when I travel. I leave copies in libraries. On park benches. Bus stops, .2. Places he would have stood. Sat. Waited. I want the world to find him the way I finally did. Unexpectedly, completely, and with no way to forget him afterward. I once asked what the hardest part of surviving was. I thought it was grief. Or guilt. Or fear. But it's none of those. It's living with the truth. Carrying it. Honoring it. Refusing to let it drown in comfort or convenience. The world moves on. People forget. But I don't. Because every time I walk past someone with their back to the wall, and a poem in their heart, I stop. I look. I listen. And I remember him. Not as the man on the street, but as the voice that changed everything. The hardest part of surviving isn't remembering. It's choosing never to forget.